There's this story floating around online about the last photographer who developed photos the old way, and the disturbing things people claimed appeared in the images. But here's the thing. I spent days researching this, and I can't find a verified case that matches this exact story. So today we're doing something different. We're going to explore what's real and what isn't. We'll dive into the actual history of the last darkrooms, documented cases of unexplained photographs, and the genuine phenomena that can make images appear wrong. Because the truth is actually more fascinating than fiction. If you want to hear more stories about forgotten crafts and the strange things that happened when they disappeared, hit that subscribe button. Let's start with what we know for certain. Traditional film photography didn't just fade away, it collapsed. Between 2000 and 2010, Kodak reported that film sales dropped by 90%, which means in just one decade, an industry that had existed since the 1800s nearly vanished. The numbers tell a brutal story. Digital camera sales surpassed film camera sales for the first time in 2003. And by 2009, Kodak discontinued Kodachrome film production on June 22nd. Kodachrome had been introduced back in 1935, which gave it 74 years before the market simply disappeared beneath it. Employment at Kodak peaked at 145,000 workers back in 1988. Then in January 2012, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. That same month, on January 18th of 2012, the world's last roll of Kodachrome was processed at Duane's Photo in Parsons, Kansas. Imagine being the person who developed that final roll, the last person to perform a chemical process that billions of photographs had gone through. That's not just the end of a product, that's the end of an entire way of seeing the world. But here's where it gets interesting. Duane's Photo in Parsons, Kansas is still operating as of 2024. They still process black and white film. Grant Steinle runs it now, and they're one of very few remaining commercial film processing labs in North America. There are others, too. The Darkroom Lab in Alabama still processes film, and the Film Photography Project still sells film and chemistry. But we're talking about a handful of operations serving what used to be a global industry. Most cities have zero commercial film processing locations now, absolutely zero. If you shoot film today, you're probably mailing it somewhere and waiting 2 to 4 weeks for results, when in the 1990s you could get 1-hour service. The cost has skyrocketed too. Processing a single roll runs between $12 and $25 in 2024, compared to $5 to $8 in 2000. Developer chemicals have gone up by an estimated 200 to 300% since 2000, and the few companies still making professional chemistry like Ilford, Kodak, and specialty brands mostly sell through internet orders now. So if there really was a last photographer developing photos the old way, they'd be working in an increasingly isolated world using expensive chemicals and serving a nearly extinct market. That isolation is fertile ground for strange stories. To understand what could go wrong in a darkroom, you need to understand the process. Traditional darkroom development required 3 chemical baths, which were developer, stop bath, and fixer. You worked under a red safe light to prevent exposing the photographic paper, but for film development, you needed complete darkness, absolute blackness. The typical development time for prints was 8 to 12 minutes. 12 minutes in the dark, watching an image slowly materialize in a chemical bath. 12 minutes where your eyes play tricks, where shadows seem to move, where you start seeing things that might not be there. And things could go wrong in ways that created genuinely disturbing results. Light leaks in cameras or dark rooms would fog the image, creating ghostly overlays. Contaminated chemistry could produce unpredictable results, and aged or heat-damaged film created artifacts, which were strange marks and shadows that weren't there when you took the picture. There's something called the Sabatier effect, where you get a partial reversal of tones. It's also called solarization. Extreme temperature changes could cause reticulation. That's a pattern in the emulsion that looks almost organic, like skin or cells. Chemical staining could create marks that looked eerily deliberate. And then there's double exposure, sometimes accidental and sometimes not. The connection between photography and the unexplained isn't new. It goes back almost to the beginning of photography itself. William H. Mumler was the first spirit photographer in America. He lived from 1832 to 1884. And in the 1860s and 1870s, he claimed he could capture deceased relatives appearing with living subjects in his photographs. In 1869, he was tried for fraud in New York, and despite evidence of deception, he was acquitted. His most famous client was Mary Todd Lincoln. In 1872, she sat for a portrait, and Mumler's photograph allegedly showed the ghost of Abraham Lincoln standing behind her with his hands on her shoulders. Whether you believe it or not, that photograph still exists, and you can look at it today. Then there's Ted Serios. He was a Chicago elevator operator who lived from 1918 to 2006, and in the 1960s he claimed he could project mental images directly onto Polaroid film, not through the camera lens, but straight from his mind to the film. A psychiatrist named Dr. Jules Eisenbud actually studied him, and Eisenbud published a book called The World of Ted Serios in 1967. Tests were conducted under controlled conditions at the University of Colorado, where Serios would stare at a Polaroid camera and images would appear. Buildings, landscapes, things that weren't in front of the lens. Skeptics suggested he used gimmick devices, and the legitimacy remains unverified. But the documented fact is that a university researcher took him seriously enough to publish a book about it. These cases established something in the public imagination. The idea that cameras could capture things invisible to the human eye, things that shouldn't be there. Now let's talk about cases that are thoroughly documented, where we have names, dates, and expert analysis. In 1966, a Canadian clergyman named Reverend Ralph Hardy took a photograph at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. It was a picture of the Tulip Staircase. When the photo was developed, it showed a shrouded figure climbing the stairs. Hardy sent it to Kodak experts for analysis, and they vetted it, but no conclusive explanation was ever provided. Then there's the Solway Firth spaceman. On May 23, 1964, a man named Jim Templeton took a photo of his daughter at Burgh Marsh in Cumberland, England. And when it was developed, there appeared to be a figure in a white spacesuit standing behind his daughter. Kodak confirmed there was no tampering with the negative. The likely explanation is that Templeton's wife was probably in the background, overexposed to the point where only her head and shoulders were visible, creating the illusion of a spaceman. But Jim Templeton insisted no one else was there. In 1919, an RF squadron photo showed something that still gets discussed today. The squadron had recently lost a mechanic named Freddie Jackson in a propeller accident, and 2 days after his death, the squadron gathered for a group photo. When it was developed, a face appeared behind one of the airmen, and multiple squadron members identified it as Freddie Jackson. Double exposure is the most likely explanation, or pareidolia, which is the psychological phenomenon where humans see faces in random patterns. It's especially common in the grain structure of photographs, particularly in shadow areas, and it's enhanced in low-quality or damaged images. But here's the thing. All 3 of these photographs were examined by Kodak, the company that literally invented consumer photography. And in each case, Kodak couldn't definitively explain what happened. So let's come back to our original question. Could there be a last photographer working alone, discovering things in developed images that shouldn't be there? The infrastructure exists. Universities still teach darkroom techniques. Art photographers maintain traditional methods, and it's considered a premium luxury service now. There are people all over the world who still work in complete darkness with chemicals that were invented over a century ago. These photographers are working with aged equipment, old cameras, sometimes film stocks that have been in freezers for decades, chemistry mixed in small batches, and papers manufactured by the last few companies still making them. And they're isolated. The community that used to surround this craft, millions of professionals and hobbyists, has collapsed to maybe a few thousand people worldwide who still do this regularly. In that isolation, in those dark rooms watching images appear in chemical baths, would you trust your eyes? If something appeared in a photograph that you didn't remember shooting, would you tell anyone? Or would you worry about your credibility in a community that's already fighting to justify its existence? Film photography is experiencing a resurgence among Gen Z and millennials as of 2023 and 2024. Kodak has reported film sales growth in recent years, and Lomography, Ilford, and Fujifilm are still producing film stocks as of 2024. Young photographers are discovering the darkroom for the first time. They're learning chemistry. They're experiencing that strange magic of watching an image appear in a tray of liquid. And they're working in darkness. And maybe some of them are seeing things they can't explain. Things that appear in their photographs, faces in the grain, figures in the shadows, double exposures they don't remember making. But in the age of Photoshop and AI image generation, who would believe them? A photograph isn't proof anymore. It's not evidence. It's just data that can be manipulated. The irony is that we're now in an era where actual darkroom photographs, chemical images on physical paper, are more trustworthy than digital files, but we've lost the cultural knowledge to evaluate them. So here's what I can tell you for certain. The story of the last photographer who developed photos the old way, and what people claimed appeared in the images, that specific story with names and dates and a documented case, I cannot verify it exists. It might be a creative writing prompt, it might be an urban legend, it might be a very local story that never made it beyond a small community, or it might be something that's still out there, undocumented, and known only to the person it happened to. But the foundation of that story is absolutely real. The last darkrooms do exist. Unexplained photographs are documented throughout history. The chemical processes that can create disturbing anomalies are well understood. And the psychological effect of working alone in darkness with vintage equipment and toxic chemicals is real too. If you're shooting film in 2024, you're part of a dying tradition. You're using tools and techniques that might not exist in another generation. And you're one of the last people who'll ever watch an image slowly appear in a chemical bath under a red light. And if something appears in that image that shouldn't be there, well, you'll have to decide for yourself what it means. Because the truth is, I can't tell you what's real and what isn't in those photographs, and no one can. That's the nature of the medium. That's the magic and the terror of it. The last photographer developing photos the old way isn't a person, it's a moment in time that's happening right now. And it's almost over. If this video made you think differently about old photography and what might still be hiding in those last darkrooms, leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.